recently at work. I've been listening to a commercial radio station that I will not name, that I would not be my first pick if I was in complete control of the radio station listened to, which I haven't been. And I was like, genuinely, some days it was becoming a problem by the end of the day, because there's probably about 5 or 6 songs that are played between 3 and 5 times over an 8-hour working day. And that is, to me, just absolutely insane, because every single time you're playing that usually American artist again, that's one spot that an Australian artist could have been played. So it's not that the song's even being played once. That's not even the problem. That there's a combined 20 to 30 times throughout a day where you could have chucked in an Australian artist and they just chose to play the same song from America. And it's like you treat people like they're idiots in a fishbowl who only like listening to one kind of thing. It's just ridiculous. But I just thought that radio station thing, I know radio isn't the flavour of the month anymore, but my God, it did my head in that that's the model for commercial radio in this country.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.
So we're now early November, right? I just have a simple question to ask you. We've recently had Halloween. We're now moving into the stage where we're thinking about Christmas. You know, I need to start thinking about and organising gifts. My wife is at the point where she's asking me to get out the Christmas tree.
No, Ella, no. I'm no, but then I'm like, why am I no? You know, Christmas is fun, but I think I'm no.
Yeah, I think it's more the traditional thing, right? It's like December 1 is when the tree, or, you know, the nearest weekend or available opening closest to December 1 is when the tree goes up. Where, my wife is all like, no, Halloween's done. It's time for Christmas. The tree's going up. And her argument is, we spent money on a nice tree. I want the tree to be up more than just a month because it feels like a waste. And I was like, I understand that. But also the exciting part of putting the tree up in December is you go, oh, Christmas is so close. But doing it in November, it's like, well, I've still got, you know, a month and a half before I get excited by it.
You're bloody bored of the thing by the time it rolls around.
Too much of a good thing. That's why Christmas is so special. It's why we love, sorry, sports reference, the World Cup, because it only comes around once every 4 years. I was talking about doing it every 2 years, and I'm like, no, let's just leave it as it is.
I was going to say, if Infantino had his way, it'd be annual. Genuinely.
There'd be no club competitions. It'd just be a continual World Cup.
It would. But no, I am anti Christmas tree before December. What I could offer as a compromise, and it's what I've and my household has been known to do over the last few years, is to leave the tree up well into January.
Yeah.
For no reason other than you've probably been away for a few weeks and also you just like haven't taken it down yet.
Well, that tends to happen anyway. And then that's also the same reasons and logic come out of, you know, I want to look at it longer because I like our tree. So I want it to be not just stuffed into the shed in a box for 11 months of the year. So I can understand it. But yeah, it's a battle that I've actually this evening lost.
Oh, you've lost?
The tree is...
Is it going up?
The tree is up as we speak.
Oh my God. Was that something where you kind of did the sums in your head and you thought, well, is my resistance going to be worth getting the desired outcome here? And you've gone no, and therefore the tree goes up? Was it one of those?
It was one of those where I resisted the first few times it was mentioned. And my logic is if it's mentioned a couple more times, then I'm probably not going to win it. But if it's not mentioned again, then I've won.
Yeah, and it's a difficult scenario because you're like, and how badly do I want to deprive my wife, who I love, of something that will bring her joy because I don't think it should be up yet. You know what I mean? You're put in a difficult position where you're being framed as a Grinch, essentially, because you don't want the tree up early. It's harder to justify why you shouldn't than it is to justify why you should in that instance.
Yeah, you feel like it's like a kid asking to kick a ball or something in the yard and you're like, no. And you're like, oh, I sound like a wanker saying no to, you know, something that's not hurting me. It's going to bring them joy. Yeah, I agree. It is a lot harder to say no. But yeah, I resisted like end of October, before Halloween had even finished. She was like, oh, so in November we're going to put the tree up. And I was like, no. So I resisted a couple of times, but yeah, the tree's now up.
And what do you think out there? When do you put your tree up? Please tell us. And while we've got you as well, if you like what you're hearing, share it around. Subscribe. I've actually learned from another podcast. I haven't actually fact-checked this, but I think 5-star ratings are beneficial for the said podcast. So if you are listening and you do like what you're hearing, could you please rate us 5 stars? Thank you very much. We will seek little more from you other than to spread the good word of Homebrewed and remind you at varying stages of podcasts every month or so that you like us and do good stuff with that. So that's that.
Yeah, give us a 5-star rating.
Give it.
I don't know what on Spotify it's a star rating. I think it's the same on Apple Podcasts if that's your platform, but whatever your platform is, leave a like or 5-star rating or subscribe, follow, leave a comment. You can do that on Spotify now as well. If you're a Spotify user, leave a comment and we can engage with you that way too on social media. Do whatever you want to do. I don't mind. But social media will be one of the things I guess we'll be talking about in this music news this evening. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about Lost Paradise, because we have an update. It took a while, but we finally have an update from Lost Paradise. It is going ahead as planned with an unchanged lineup and festival experience, despite receiving 0 from their ticketing revenue after Light did the dirty on them.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. Really good news. It was genuinely concerning. I was speaking to someone about this last week, and I think the update actually had come then. I just hadn't seen it. I didn't know. But I was like, yeah, it's genuinely concerning. And I suppose the longer that things don't remain unsaid, you could read it two ways. Either it's more concerning or it's less concerning because they're working things out. But yeah, it sounds like it was the worst case scenario because they haven't received a dime of their ticketing revenue. So presumably Lights managed all that and they haven't actually released the money from that yet because their contract had not concluded. So with all that, I would conclude that they were insured, I guess.
So, based on the statement that Lost Paradise, so for a quick breakdown, Light, they were the ticketing provider. We went deep into it a few music newses ago, so look at the big breakdown there. But so in the Lost Paradise statement, they said on the 14th of September, our ticketing partner Light suddenly shut down. Before closing, they diverted 100% of ticket funds into a bank account outside of our control. They then transferred the money offshore out of our reach. Despite nearly selling out, Lost Paradise had not received any money from ticket sales. And they've broken down what should have happened and what actually happened. So what should have happened is Lost Paradise should have received the cost of the ticket and Light would have received the booking fee. But what actually happened is Light took 100% of the funds.
They just sound like such a dog company, to be honest. Like all that and then just switching it out, sending it overseas, very, very low act. They've since partnered back up with Megatix, which seem to run a better shop. And the FAQ, as you said, is really, really good. But either way, it is just really relieving to know that they're going to be back. Whether it's insurance or some other way, I don't know. We're not sure. But it's back and it's not far off selling out still, which means they still are bucking the trend of festivals being unpopular in Australia, much like its Central Coast compadre rolling sets.
They actually posted 7 hours ago as we're recording this that Lost Paradise is officially sold out. So they have now sold out all of their tickets to Lost Paradise. They had less than 100 tickets remaining yesterday. They've obviously been snapped up. So fantastic to see that it's sold out. Incredible that it's going ahead as originally planned, with no artists cut from the lineup, nothing changing around the festival in terms of other programming or anything. It's going ahead as originally planned, despite not receiving any money for ticket sales, which we know is how they would receive the bulk of their money, is through ticket sales. They also said in their statement that they have secured enough funding and have found a way to deliver the festival, but despite extensive legal efforts, we have not been able to recover the stolen funds, which is baffling to me. If there was obviously an agreement in place that Light would receive the booking fee, Lost Paradise received the ticketing fee, that money was then transferred offshore. Light have now shut down and have presumably just disappeared. If you can track down whoever's responsible or get a hold of them, then surely it's a slam dunk that Lost Paradise receive their rightful ticket revenue, and maybe even a little bit more for all the upheaval that this has caused.
Yeah, I'd say that'd be the difficult part, finding them, but then also getting the money. I know, like, if it sounds like they've moved it offshore, it might have got so funneled in such a way where it's untraceable. Or, as we said in the last music news, which if you are a bit more curious about this situation, we're definitely not going to go into it with the same depth. So go back in the Homebrewed archives and listen to that. It's only maybe a month or two ago that we spoke about it.
Archives, but it's not that old.
Yeah, it's not archives, sorry. Just go on your podcasting platform of choice and scroll down for like 11 seconds and you should find it on Homebrewed. But yeah, I mean, they were a US-based company, and they had events and festivals much larger than Lost Paradise, who were US-based. Coachella, of course, on their books, which is, why they were seen as reputable by Lost Paradise. But when the creditors come calling, if they liquidate or whatever else, whatever assets remained, Lost Paradise was never going to be top of the list to get their money back before some of those larger events that are also based in the same country as Light was. So it seemed like a hill to climb regardless, but it is really disappointing that that's happened. But I mean, for other events, this probably would have been the end of them, at least for this year, if not permanently. It is so fantastic to see that Lost Paradise have found a way to turn it around and go on with their event and keep going. And obviously some very hard lessons learned that, weren't really their faults, but lessons learned nonetheless. But it's fantastic that the event is still going ahead, first and foremost.
Yeah, definitely, because they sold, I think, 95% of their ticket sales in the first 2 days. I think it was the first 48 hours, they were 95% sold out. So I guess that would have given them confidence that there was, interest in the festival, where I guess other festivals that have pulled the pin were because there were low ticket sales to begin with. But when you then throw in the fact that Lost Paradise have now received zero money from those ticket sales, the same reasons that other festivals have cancelled could have easily, the same fate could have fallen for Lost Paradise. But as you say, very, very awesome that they haven't done that they are going ahead, and that the lineup is miraculously unchanged. And just quickly, Fisher headlining on that one. So, there's the Ryans, teenage dads, who, if you've been listening to this podcast for the last few months, you'll know that I've had their most recent album, Major Domo, on repeat. So, yeah, and there's also an FAQ section on their website as well. So if you do have tickets to Lost Paradise when it was sold through Light, they give you a breakdown of what you actually need to do to make sure that your ticket will be valid, because any ticket issued through Light will not be valid for the festival.
Yeah, and just how cruel, just on that note, like, festivals are selling tickets really slowly, and it's causing them issues, and a lot of them are just having to shut up shop. One of them sells really quickly, and they go, "Congratulations, you sold tickets so quickly. We're just going to steal all your money now." It's just so cruel. Like they're probably sitting there going, "Damn, I wish we sold tickets a bit more slowly so that we got more of the money." But yeah, as we said, most importantly, the event is still going ahead, and kudos to the whole team behind Lost Paradise for being able to make that happen.
I guess that's sort of the state of play of the industry at the moment, but I guess we can dive a little bit deeper into that because we do have some statistics around the state of play of music at the moment, which is everyone's favorite topic, statistics and numbers. And, we're not math guys, so you can breathe easy that we're not going to go too deep into any of this.
This is a safe space for you too. We're not too fond of maths, but we do like numbers because they can tell us a bit of a story, particularly when it comes to Australian music. And what we are going to bring you keep
doing it tonight because
I keep doing
Well, look, two things. One, it is nearly 6 p.m. as we're recording, so it is evening, and two, that's just still an old habit from the radio days because we're broadcasting of an evening. So
it's a hangover.
And
it's a hangover.
You might be listening to this at night, and in which case it's accurate. So,
and if you're not, just imagine it's night. Close your eyes. Not if you're driving, but if you're not driving, then close your eyes.
Just live in someone else's shoes for once, please. Okay, the world does not revolve around you.
Exactly. Yeah. You bloody narcissist. Anyway.
No. Now that's sorted.
Yeah, listeners lost.
5-star rating, please.
Yeah, on that 5-star rating. Can you do that now? Thank you. GYROstream, or I hope it's Gyro or GYROstream. I'm going to call it GYROstream.
I'll say Gyro and we can hedge our bets.
Perfect. They're an independent digital music distribution and artist services company, which is such a mouthful. Hopefully they could condense that so people can describe them better. But they do an annual sound check report, which, just a note, I think there's another report called Sound Check on Australian music. Anyway, I don't think they copyright report names, but it is maybe time to get more creative there. Irrespective of that, they do have some really good data in there. And because GYROstream specifically revolve around independent musicians and industry professionals, they have all data that relates to independent musos, which is exactly what we're after. The report broadly addresses music industry trends, things like release strategies, how people are listening to and finding music, how artists are feeling about their music, etc. And it also covers live music, climate, even things like AI. So first and foremost, if you do want to check this out in more depth, check it out via the GYROstream website. You have to give them your email, unfortunately. I did it. They're probably going to send you things, but to get access to the full report. But reading through it, it is really good. As these things always are, it's put together beautifully. The formatting is awesome. They have so many cool graphics. So it's very visually stimulating as well. But it is has an absolute wealth of resources and information on the Australian industry as it relates to independent musicians. So let's kick into it. They started by surveying over 400 artists and music professionals. So that's a good sample size. I mean, we've spoken about this in the past, but if you under scientific sample size, et cetera, that is a good amount of people or artists to get a representation of the industry. What we found really interesting, is the whole thing, but we'll start with the fact that independent music is kind of led by rock and pop at the moment. And I would say pop is having something of a renaissance is too strong a word because it never really went anywhere. But I think pop sounds, pop sensibilities are having far more of a spotlight than they were maybe 10 years ago, especially when it comes to independent musicians in Australia. And they're doing it very, very well.
Yeah, I feel like there's the different takes on pop where previously I think there was a criticism of a lot of pop music sounded the same, where I feel like now you look across the pop genre and there's so many subgenres and different types that are, I think, happening. And yeah, as you're talking about the independent, is that just because pop and rock are the most common genres, or is there some sort of outlier within those genres that allows people to be more independent? Because we know that there's obviously country musicians, there's all sorts of genres that people are independent. So is this just purely a volume reason as to why rock and pop are the most common for the independent, I guess? Or is it? Yeah. Or is it literally there's something about those genres that allows you to make connections and continue with your craft being more independent?
Perhaps it's popularity because it's more widely liked, I guess, so it's easier to pick up an audience as an independent artist. That would be a guess, but it's an interesting question. Of those surveyed, around about 24% were rock and a further 24% around about, not exactly, were pop artists. The next most represented was electronic, then instrumental, which I found interesting, then hip-hop, folk, R&B, country. Country, just for reference, that's 4.5%, heavy metal 2.5%, etc. So that's kind of the breakdown of the artists they spoke to. What's really interesting, and we just kind of discussed this in part in our last music news, more from the consumer's perspective, but they did find that 66% of artists have released singles in the past year over EPs and albums, which made up 16 and 17%. Respectively. They posit this as being driven by the playlist model, which increasingly shapes the global release landscape because it allows only one track per release to be pitched to streaming service playlists, which encourages artists to focus on singles over larger projects. Now, I think that's really interesting for the same reasons we spoke about on the last music news, but the way streaming models work, particularly the playlisting side of it, and maybe if you're listening and you're not a musician, playlisting is like such a massive part of release strategies now. It's I suppose akin to what radio was, and still is for some artists, but definitely streaming now. Excuse me. So the fact that it is influencing artists to the point where we're seeing them just choose to drop singles and focus on singles is really interesting.
And I guess when you put in the financial incentives, partnering with that as well, because obviously it's cheaper just to make a single as opposed to an EP or an album. And if you're incentivized by these playlists and radio play and everything around it, then yeah, it makes sense that most artists are going to release purely singles. Does that include singles that are in the build-up that are then released on an album as well? Do you know?
Well, the question was, what have you released in the past year? So 66% of people said singles.
Right.
Maybe a percentage of those it is building to a body of work, but that mightn't be released, outside of the period they're asked about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I was just curious because, obviously you have lead singles going into an album or EP release to try and build a bit of hype, or you might have it as 5 singles and then at the end packaged together and here's my brand new EP. So I was curious on that. But if I can just go back quickly to the independent rock and pop artists, what's also fascinating about that is they would be the more common genres that are signed to labels. So in terms of being seen by the labels, if it was, if that was what you desired, then you would think those genres would have the best chance of being picked up. So maybe this is also reflective on an artist's mentality towards labels and why so many are, it comes down, I guess, to a choice for more so in the rock and pop genres than others, but maybe it does come down to a choice of I would prefer to be independent than tied into a label.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that, because genuinely they did survey this exact question, and they found that despite the challenges of juggling it all yourself, 63% of artists that they surveyed would prefer independence, 19% would prefer a label, and 16% were unsure. So still 19 a considerable majority would prefer. What was that, sorry?
Was that 19% would want a label?
Yeah.
Sorry.
19.7%.
It sounded like you said 90. 90.
Oh,
and I was
sorry.
like, whoa, that's a jump.
Bloody hell, there's 200% in this one. No, 19% would prefer a label, 63 prefer independent, and 16.5% were unsure. But it is really interesting with all these things that we have talked about and we're going to talk about, consider that is still the kind of overwhelming majority there, which I suppose speaks to the attitude of independent artists who want control over their art. And we've spoken to Andy Bull most recently about this specifically. We've spoken to Chelsea Berman recently, who springs to mind, reading a lot of these statistics. And a lot of the artists that we speak to, because we cover the Central Coast and we tend to cover independent artists quite a lot, they want that control over their own project. They're happy to do it. They're hard workers and they're creative. So your creativity doesn't extend to just what you produce for a lot of artists. It's the whole project and having control over that too.
Yeah, obviously it is a lot more work, but I think, it's more than just a full-time job because you're effectively doing yourself and whatever you do full-time, but then you're also becoming a full-time publicist and a full-time manager and full-time, all the different job labels that are spread across the industry for yourself, because you have to champion yourself as an independent artist. And you may be listening to this episode as well on Oz Indie Radio as well, which of course champions independent artists across Australia. On that study that you're mentioning, Eamonn, 65% of the respondents said that they would prefer to be independent. Well, 100% of those questioned currently independent artists, or were some of those attached to a label?
100% independent artist questions and surveyed for this particular set of data that we're running through. So yes,
I would be curious to know if that question was set to artists who are currently attached to a label. Obviously, they would prefer to answer anonymously, I would imagine, but I'd be very curious to know what percentage of those currently attached to a label would say, if I can get out, I would.
I was going to say they wouldn't answer that because they'd have whoever is their manager over their shoulder watching them fill out the thing, or in the call with them as they're being asked the questions by the surveyor.
Yeah, look, very likely, but I would be very curious to see a lot of that data, because a lot of independent musicians love the fact that they're independent, and then you hear musicians who were tied to a label who are now independent, and they just talk about the benefits of being independent and the control that you have over your artistry. So yeah, that data isn't available. We won't be talking about that, but as I am now hypothesizing, I would be very curious to see a study like that.
And this is why we like data, people. It is interesting. We hope you're still interested anyway, because we're going to keep going. It also found DIY methods of promotion are skyrocketing. 66% of artists having a budget of less than $500 per release. So imagine a single release, $500. So artists are adapting to smaller budgets. 43% cite content creation as the most powerful promotional tool, which jumps up from the last time a GYROstream did this report by nearly double, not quite double, but nearly double. So it's showing that they're kind of pushing to more cost-effective forms of promotion. And on that, they say that growing an audience is cited to be the number one barrier artists are facing to progress to the next step of their career, closely followed by funding. And those numbers, 38 and 26% respectively, are the barriers that they're facing.
And that content creation is TikTok, Instagram Reels, or the short form content that artists are now being told that they need to build up around a release. And, some artists love it, some artists aren't about it. If you listen to our chat with Andy Bull that was released on Monday, he's very much against it. And his logic is, if you get popular for doing a thing you don't really want to do, whether that is, creating the short form content, or there's a specific type of content that you're making to promote the release, if that type of content becomes popular, then your fans, what's the word? Audience is the word I'm looking for. Your audience will then naturally, that's the content that they liked and clicked with, so that's the content that they would like you to continue creating, as opposed to actually wanting to listen to your music. Now, there will be some crossover, I'm sure, and that's why so many artists are pushing very hard on Instagram and TikTok, and also because labels tell them to, but these are independent artists who are doing this too. So, yeah, it's an interesting discussion, but the discoverability on these platforms, I think the benefits would surely outweigh some of the negatives.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'd never really, until we spoke to Andy about it, I hadn't quite considered that perspective. I suppose, I mean, the message is you want to love what you're doing, whether it's content creation or not, but artists, as per this report, do see content creation as being a very important part of them promoting and growing their audience. And what Andy Bull was kind of saying was, well, you might spend hours on one video and it won't really do anything. And we've spoken to artists in the past who say, you know, well, I spent this many hours making this video, no one saw it, and then I just chuck something up because, you know, I had to spare 10 minutes and it got 100,000 views. How much that translated into maybe an audience or dollars in their pocket, it's hard to say. But I suppose the takeaway there, at least when we spoke to Andy Bull, was to at least love what you're doing, because if you do spend your time trying to grow an audience doing something you don't like, then you have to keep doing that in order to retain or grow that audience further. And that's going to get you in a loop of dissatisfaction.
And can I just jump in here quickly? I, for work, went to a course/seminar thing, and it was all about social media and virality. And the concept of it was, you know, learning about the algorithms and learning how to create content that will go viral. And the guy who was doing the course, I don't think was that, you know, I think he was in the world, but necessarily, you know, viral content, you talk to anyone who made something that went viral, they're going, I don't know what worked or why it clicked, it just did. Like, to try and replicate that is almost impossible. But this guy was trying to scientifically break down a method and how it worked. So after the seminar, I thought, well, that sounded like it's not going to work. Went on to his page, and there is one video which I would say went viral. And by viral, I mean like 10,000 views compared to a few hundred and all the other ones. And the video that has 10,000 views was just absolute complete happenstance. It's one car next to the other, and their number plate is like 1 digit difference or something like that. And it's like, you're the person teaching about virality, and all these videos that you're spending hours to come up with are going nowhere. And then just by chance, 2 number plates or 1 digit apart, you're filming that and uploading that, and that's the one that goes viral. So the point of me sharing this is, one, that seminar I felt was rubbish, and it was, but 2, to try and go viral on these platforms is so difficult, and there's no real formula to it. You know, you can try and make the algorithms work in your favor where you can, but yeah, I don't know. I guess as an artist, you got to weigh up how much time you're spending on that content compared to the actual art that you're wanting people to listen and engage with. And if you want people to engage with you on social media as well as your artistry, then that's a perfect way for you to go about it. But yeah, just keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah. And I suppose, I guess that's really nailing down on what the point that Andy Bull was making when we spoke to him, if we were to draw that from it. And yeah, the algorithms, like that, no one knows how they work. Nobody does. And anyone who tells you they do is lying. Obviously, there's things that you can do. There's times, but even when we did Homebrewed studio sessions and we had the lovely Beehive PR helping us, you know, even for them, they're really good at what they do, and they know how, you know, times, but they say it's ever changing, and sometimes things just are the way they are. It's a weird beast that no one seems to understand, so don't get too hung up.
And part of it's deliberate as well. Like YouTube might change their parameters for what counts as a view, or how their algorithm's going to work, and they deliberately won't tell you how it works because they don't want people gaming the system. They don't want people going, oh, this counts as a view, or this is what the algorithm's looking for. I'll just include this in all of my videos so I can become really popular and famous. So they deliberately don't share that information with you, which makes it even harder as a content creator to try and feed the algorithm what it wants, because as you say, it's constantly changing and they're not telling you specifically what they're changing.
Yeah, it's a labyrinth, absolute labyrinth. What's also a labyrinth for Australian artists, it seems, is the ARIA charts, which we reported on in the music news last year. I think we were still on radio when we spoke about this.
We were, because we were talking about, I think Vance Joy was...
Yes, Riptide.
Vance Joy was still in the ARIA charts, and I'm just having a very quick look at the charts now. Bruno Mars number 1, Sabrina Carpenter 2, Billie Eilish 3, Lady Gaga and Bruno Mars at 4, Shabuzi with his all-time classic Tipsy, a bar song, in at number 5, and a bit of Chaperone, a bit more, Sabrina Carpenter, Gracie Abrams,
Do you
Tyler,
see anyone
Creator,
from Australia?
Teddy Swim, Sabrina Carpenter, a bit of Hosier, more Tyler, the Creator, the Kid Laroi.
Hey.
Here we go. We have an Aussie in on the ARIA Top 50 single charts. He's in at number 30, which is for his single Nights Like This.
And this is the Australian charts.
And
that's
hang on.
what the A in ARIA is.
Another Aussie in at number 37. Vance Joy's Riptide.
Far out.
Still in the charts at number 37.
Not a bad song, but my God, we can do
Down
not
from 27 last week. So it's dropped 10 places this week. It's 118 weeks in the ARIA Top 50 single charts.
An enduring track, but nuts the state of things right now. And what the GYROstream report found that in 2023 there were no Australian new releases in the ARIA end of year charts, and 55% of respondents to their survey believe that Australian music consumers are not supportive of homegrown talent. Obviously that means 45% felt they do show support. So it does highlight the perceptions held amongst independent musicians about artists, Australian artistry, and those ARIA chart numbers do not help that. And I think what doesn't help that more so, or in a large part, is Australia's obsession with cultures that aren't our own, or music from cultures that aren't our own and not our own cultures. And the example that I have is recently at work, I've been complaining to so many people about this, but I've been listening to a commercial radio station that I will not name, that I would not be my first pick if I was in complete control of the radio station listened to, which I haven't been. And I was like, genuinely, some days it was becoming a problem by the end of the day, because the Tipsy bar song that you mentioned before is one of them. There's a Sabrina Carpenter song, Morgan Wallen. There's probably about 5 or 6 songs that are played between 3 and 5 times over an 8-hour working day. And that is, to me, just absolutely insane, because every single time you're playing that usually American artist again, that's one spot that an Australian artist could have been played. So it's not that the song's even being played once. That's not even the problem. That there's a combined 20 to 30 times throughout a day where you could have chucked in an Australian artist and they just chose to play the same song from America again and again and again. And it's like you treat people like they're idiots in a fishbowl who only like listening to one kind of thing. They either become that, or all it means is that Australian artistry is so far out of view that they don't know it's there. So can you blame independent artists for then having that perception that that Australians aren't supportive? Because when you flick on the biggest Australian radio stations, you're hard pressed to hear an Australian artist play, and they don't get the cultural recognition. They don't seem to influence culture. It's just ridiculous. But I just thought that radio station thing, I know radio isn't the flavour of the month anymore, but my God, it did my head in that's the model for commercial radio in this country. Yeah,
and this is, and as we've mentioned privately, is, I don't have any issue with, I actually don't mind Sabrina Carpenter's songs. I just don't want to hear it 3 to 5 times in an 8-hour span across the countless ads and then the same songs you're hearing on repeat. And this is and they know it's a problem, because a different commercial radio station on the same network, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they were doing the no repeat workday, which proves that they are aware that people dislike the fact that they're hearing the same song so many times throughout the workday, that their whole branding for the station and their promotion was listen to us throughout your working times because we're not going to repeat the same songs.
That's like me promoting myself and not murdering someone. It's like, I'm going to get through a whole day without killing another person. Like, I should be patted on the back for that one. That should just be the basics for radio. There is enough music out there for you to not need to play 5 songs 3 to 5 times a day over and over again. It just does my head in. But yeah, hopefully there's some movement on that. It doesn't help. I mean, as this shows, to bring it back, it doesn't help Australian music. Obviously visibility is a huge issue, but even perception when you're making music and you don't even believe that the majority of your country are remotely interested in music from their own country. But the flip side of that is, despite concerns around local support, 64%, so the majority, believe that Australian artists don't need to be successful overseas to achieve success in Australia, which when you flip the coin and you look at the other really successful bands that are Australian that have done really, really well, Lime Cordiale is one that springs to mind. I don't know that they have a huge overseas following, but they have done extremely well within Australia, which is really good.
Yeah, definitely. Lime Cordiale actually one that I told the story about how my mate who lives in Canada saw them on their US tour, but that, the venues that they'd be playing over, well, actually, I was going to say they'd probably be smaller, but they could actually be a similar size, but because they're not touring there as frequently as what they tour Australia, they have everyone who would potentially go to more gigs at smaller venues go to this one bigger gig. I don't know if that made any sense to you, Eamon. As I was explaining that theory, I had the idea in my head. I started talking about it.
I've
gone, don't know if that made any sense as it came out, but
no, I got it.
The other thing that we need to keep in mind with this is we're having these problems with radio, which do have quotas that they need to play a specific amount of Australian content. Now, we've mentioned before, they often don't meet those quotas, or if they do, it's because they do an all-Australian show between 12 a.m. and 2 a.m. so they can say, oh, look, we played, we fit our quotas, even though it's not really during the popular programming times. But they do still have these quotas where they need to play Australian music. If we're going down the streaming services and the popularity and rise of those and, the playlistings, there's no quotas for Spotify to have a certain amount of Australian content delivered to Australian people on Spotify. There's nothing like that. So it could get even more scary in terms of the lack of Australian content within Australia.
Yeah, and you then have to wonder how the algorithms by which Spotify and other streaming services operate, if you're listening to one song, does it throw you Australian artists as suggestions afterwards? Or is it more tailored to American artists? It's the same idea of like how people of colour are poorly represented by facial recognition technology because it's designed based off of models that are not them and therefore they suffer. So if a lot of these algorithms are developed overseas in America based off of popular music from that country, how well represented are Australian artists based on those algorithms? That's a question that I have seen asked before. I don't know the answer to, but it's just something worth considering in there. The GYROstream report also just quickly found that live show streaming and merch are the primary money makers for artists. So the biggest source of income from your music career, what is that? That was the question posed by the reporters or those conducting the survey. 54% said live shows, 25% said streaming, 7% said merch, and then after that it dips well below that, which really sticks to what we've heard from artists. And if we can direct you to another recent chat of ours, go listen to the conversation with Andy Martin, from Brisbane, who we spoke to a few weeks back, and he did a fantastic job of really just being like, nah, I'm an open book, and peeling back what the process is for him financially, how things work. He had 1 million streams on an album that he said he made $3,000 off, whereas he could make that in merch much, much quicker if people bought his merch or tickets to his shows. But it's really interesting that again, the majority of people, the biggest source is live shows, and it reinforces why when festivals go under, when shows don't go ahead, that is a significant hit to artists.
Yeah, and why it was so important that Lost Paradise was able to go ahead. Even though what I've just done is a really nice little bow on this music news, and it's a perfect way to tie in the first story with the last, and to wrap it up, I do have another couple of points I want to keep talking about with this study. One of them was a stat that you told me before we started recording was, I think, the discoverability on platforms like TikTok. I think it was 51% of people aged 18 to 24 actually attended a concert off the back of finding a song on TikTok, which is huge because, as we just heard, live shows is a huge income stream for these artists. And if they can get that discoverability on the back of something like TikTok, like, you know, that's the two worlds colliding in what the artists are trying to create. So it's good to know that it can be really effective. The other point I wanted to quickly mention, you're talking about AI music. Does that mean when the AI revolution comes around, there's going to be no Aussie content because it's all going to be machine learned from American music?
Well, I mean, like that, I think that's real. I think that's genuinely real, that a lot of what AI is being trained on is going to be specific to America, because that's where a lot of it comes and a lot of our pop culture comes from. That is a definite real possibility. They actually did touch on AI in this report while we're there. I wasn't going to mention it, but now that AI is in the chat, we may as well.
AI is always in the chat.
It is. AI is genuinely probably scraping this podcast, but 40% of artists are now leveraging AI to enhance their creative and operational process. So 13.5% uptick since last year, 40%, which is a significant. And there is still a degree, however, of reluctance within the community about integrating the technology into the industry. The question they posed is, why haven't you used AI? Top answer was maintain creative autonomy. Second was not interested. Third was haven't even explored it. And fourth was ethical concerns. So it is interesting to kind of understand the nuances that are informing. But I mean, I'm of the opinion that it's not going anywhere. Artists may as well find ways to make it useful for them, insofar as it does not compromise creative autonomy, and we don't start just listening to AI generated music and do away with artists completely, which I don't think will happen.
It's a bold statement, but I hope it doesn't happen either. And for the full breakdown of, you know, is it a tool? Is it, you know, how can it help artists? How is it a hindrance? What should we be afraid of moving forward? That we've spoken about AI on previous editions as well. So we've tied the bow on it, and then we've squeezed a little bit more into the box. It's like when you go to KFC and you get their hot chips and they've closed the carton, but there's still some chips sticking out of the top of the box. That's what we've just given you, the chips sticking out the top of those little extras, or some bag chips or something.
Just put whatever. A beautiful image in my head. But yeah, if you are interested in opening that KFC box of chips, aka the report itself, head to GYROstream.com. It's called the Sound Check Report. It is really interesting if you are interested in that kind of stuff, which if you're still listening, you probably are. So check that out. Great stuff. Great to have that kind of breakdown. The more we have, the better we can understand the industry, the better we can improve it. So that's us. Bows on the music news. Hope you enjoyed.
And just for hedging our bets, GYROstream. Sorry, let's just...
Gyroscope.
That's a band. They're probably still in the top 20 ARIA charts.
More than likely.
There's problems everywhere you look at the Australian music industry, and studies like what GYROstream, or GYROstream if you're Eamonn, you know, hedging our bets. We're covering basis. We're getting it right or wrong 50% of the time, that's fine. But, you know, those sorts of surveys are, you know, very handy. And, you know, the state government are conducting their own surveys. Their annual report will probably be due out sort of second quarter of next year, potentially, or end after the first quarter of next year from memory was when their first one came out. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see the year-on-year changes in those reports as well. So, whilst I joke about statistics and data and how it's quite dry and boring, but the nuanced conversations that you get by looking at the data is what we're interested in, and hopefully it was somewhat interesting listening to this as well.
Here's hoping. But yeah, if you did find it not interesting, please rate us 5 stars. Share. Tell everyone about us. But no, hopefully you did enjoy. We are homebrewed. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Go and get yourself some KFC chippies, because I'm sure I made everyone crave some by mentioning that as a reference.
You genuinely did.